Hi, this is Siofra Bradigan, and this is Siofra's Magic Alcove. So, since Samhain is just right around the corner for those of us that are in the Northern Hemisphere, I thought I'd do a little short video on haunted objects. So, something we've covered here and there, but not specifically. So, I'm going to try and remember the different kinds of encounters I've had with objects and how those differ from, you know, we'll see where this goes. Like usual, I don't know what I'm going to say till I say it. So, um, there's of course psychometry, which is reading an object, and that is reading the energy that's been left on an object, not necessarily making it a haunted object. It just means that objects will absorb a certain amount of energy, flavor, sometimes memories of uh, a person who has used or worn that object for a long period of time. And if you're good at that particular ability, then you can pick up things. I certainly have had some experiences with that where, see, the first one, or one of the ones I had was with the Himalayan crystals. Someone asked me to do a reading on their energy, and I ended up seeing how they were mined and seeing Chinese soldiers uh, using weapons on miners and forcing them to dig these crystals out. So, because of that experience that I had with them, I can't use Tibetan crystals. Uh, they just kind of really, yeah. I'm I'm worried about using one and finding out it's a similar type of situation, so I just avoid them altogether. You make your choices. You have to decide what's going to be safe for you or not, and that's become unsafe for me because I don't care for knowing that piece of information. There's nothing I can do with it, nothing I can do about it, except not buy them. So that's where I'm at with that. And like the necklace that I bought from a local shop years ago, the not the one I made, but the Egyptian style necklace that's made of bone I've worn a few times. When I saw that in the store, I was immediately drawn to it and I wasn't sure why. And when I picked it up and I put it on and clasped it behind my neck, all of my chakras just like lit up and I burst into tears. It was like it had once belonged to me in a different life. I don't know if it did or not, or if it was just the energy of it that made me feel that way. But again, not a haunted object because that was um, my reaction to the object, to the energy of the object, and I never got a sense that there was a spirit attached to it. So, of ones, let's see, there was an artist that I worked with up in Portland, and he bought a used mattress. And he started having some insane, intense haunting activity from the moment he brought that mattress in his house. We're talking things holding him down and, terror, night terror type stuff, which he'd never had before. And so I worked with him to try and see if we could clear that mattress. And in the end, I just said, really throw the mattress away. You need to buy a new mattress. And, he bought it at Goodwill kind of store. I'm not sure which one, but it was a used mattress when he bought it. And if you're a sensitive person and you're buying used furniture, you have to really think about the possibility of something either coming home with you or having an energy that's inimical to your existence, something that's going to really bother you. I purchased a bed at Hospice, one of our local stores, and we were looking for um, electric beds, like hospital beds. Ian was having a lot of trouble with acid reflux, and laying flat was bad for him, so I've got him one. We came into some money from a settlement from a car accident, and that was one of the things I did with it. And then I bought myself a used one because the place that sold them had gone out of business. It was one of those, wrong time, wrong place kind of thing. So I bought the frame and it had the mattress with it. And I brought it home. And the first night I slept on that thing all night long, there was a parade of old people walking around that bed. It was like, and I woke up in the morning when I woke up completely, and I thought, okay, I cannot sleep on this mattress because this bed, this mattress in particular, a lot of people have died on this mattress, and I'm just like getting all of their images and collection of their energy and so forth. So I bought a new mattress online, one of those big foam mattresses, and then of course I had to wait for the horrible smell to go away so I could sleep. But it works now. But I got rid of the mattress because there's just sometimes there's no way to cleanse things out of an object. It's just you're too sensitive to coexist with something that has all of that energy in it. My granddaughter went with me on one of our, well, she's been on a couple, but on this particular paranormal investigation that we did at a local theater. We've done 2 different theaters in our community. And this one, there was a lot of stuff going on in the theater. I mean, there's always more than one thing happening. So we were, checking out the whole thing. And one of the things I decided to check out was the props department to see what they had, what they used on stage and that kind of thing. And they had this big plush, easy chair, like a recliner kind of thing that they used in a lot of their productions. I didn't sit in it. I touched it. When I touched it, I could tell that the last person who owned this chair or, who spent a lot of time in this chair was in a lot of pain when they sat in that chair towards the end of their life. And the chair absorbed all of their pain. And I had my granddaughter check it out without telling her what I found, which is always a good way of doing these things if you want to get independent verification, at least the best that you can do, having, individuals go through and read objects or sense presences or, get information from a space and not talk to each other until after everyone has done it. So no one is pre-programmed to finding a certain specific kind of energy in a specific location. If everybody feels the same energy from the same location, then you've probably got yourself a valid piece of information. So anyway, I sent my granddaughter in there to just check out the props. I didn't tell her what props to check out. I said, just go over there and check them out, see if you feel anything. She comes back and tells me that that chair was hurting, that it hurt to touch. So I'm like, okay, I'm pretty confident about this. So I told the woman at the end of our we were doing our initial look-see planning kind of session. Often when I go to one of these things, I don't immediately start crossing people over or whatever. I want to get a read of the energy, what kinds of issues I'm dealing with, whether I've got, ley lines crossing or portals, or is it a spirit or is it an object, or, what exactly is going on. And then I come up with my plan of action and go back and then follow through with my plan. Anyway, I told her that no one should sit in that chair because of what we had sensed in it, and they needed to get rid of the chair and buy a new chair, something hopefully that didn't have that kind of energy stuck to it. So she told the guy who wasn't there when we did this about what we said, and he thought that sounded pretty stupid, so he sat in the chair. And he said, see, I'm fine. Apparently, the poor man couldn't get out of bed the next day because he was in such agony. Every muscle and bone in his body was aching. And I'm like, told you. Just don't listen to me, that's fine. So, going into antique shops has always been a little bit of a, or even secondhand stores, has always been a little bit of a risk factor, depending on how I'm feeling, how strong I'm feeling, how clear I am, and that sort of thing. So, one of the more intense things that happened, which isn't again a haunted object, but an object that has a huge amount of energy stored in it, in this case, highly negative energy. And Ian and I went into one of our local shops, and he saw this display of knives, and he felt something. And at that time, he didn't feel things very clearly or very often, so he was excited that he felt something. And so he's like, come over here and look at this thing. I can feel. It's pretty exciting. So I, silly me, dropped my shields to go look at the thing, because I know that's what, it's that kind of a thing, and end up in front of a cupboard full of Nazi memorabilia, knives, mostly knives. And all of the knife points were faced right at me. All the points were pointing at me. And I immediately started to feel like I was going to vomit, and I had to run outside into the street and not vomit on the sidewalk, and then get in the car and drive to the local park, which was not too far away, thank goodness, and jump out of the car and run up the road or up the path to an open grassy area underneath a tree, and threw my body on the ground and just, grounded it out. It was close. I'm really surprised I didn't throw up because that was such negative energy. So I had no doubt that they were real. They weren't reproductions. Something really negative happened there. Again, not a haunted object, but certainly intense to encounter. So, along the lines of weapon-like things, I had a client who started having activity in her house. She would be standing at the kitchen sink, and all of a sudden glasses were breaking, she was feeling sick, objects were flying, that kind of almost poltergeist activity, and she thought that maybe she had a haunting, and she asked me to come over and check it out. So I came over and I sat on the floor in front of the sink in the kitchen, and I got this wave of rage against women, hatred, kind of anger stuff. And I thought, okay, it didn't feel like a spirit particularly, but it was a very strong energy. And I asked some of the basic questions. Have you brought anything new into the house? Like, first, when did this activity begin? So she tells me when it began. I said, so just before the activity began, did you buy something used and bring it into the house? And indeed, she had bought a used shotgun or rifle of some kind. And then my next question was, where is it located? Is it under where we're standing? And under where we were standing was their basement. And in the corner where the sink was upstairs was the gun cabinet, and the gun was in the cabinet aiming straight up. So I went down there and I'm like, okay, so whoever owned this gun before you would visualize whenever he shot anything that he was shooting his wife. He was very angry with her. This was a way that he vented his rage to get it out and stuff like that. And it was a strong enough energy that it has stayed with the gun. I think we can actually fix this one because, it's like we need to ground the cabinet. It was like up above the floor. And so we got some copper wire, which is one of the things you can use to ground an object quickly, is, having copper on the ground going around the object and back to the ground, and so it pulls that energy out and down into the earth. So we found some copper wire. I think she called her husband and had him bring home some copper wire that so we could accomplish that. And they weren't sure whether or not the person who had owned it had passed, so I got some cedar, fresh cedar, from their backyard and boiled it up and passed it over the cedar to cleanse it to make sure if there was any death energy associated with it that would be gone. And then her husband decided after all of that he believed I was correct in my diagnosis, I guess, of their house. He took the weapon apart so it was no longer aiming up and kept it that way. So, very interesting case. Still not what I would call a haunted object. So now we get into some of the ones that definitely were haunted objects. And one of them was the Buddhist spirit in the antique shop. And, each time you encounter something, you have to sort of think on your feet, figure out what's the best approach to take, what action can you take, what is ethical, for you and your practice, and all that stuff. And I walked into this antique shop here in town, and as I was wandering around, I got near this rather large Buddha head. I mean, the head was like 6 feet high, and it had come off of another statue, a much larger statue. At least that's the impression that I got. As soon as I saw the head, felt the energy, I felt an actual presence of a spirit in there, and I saw an army going in and destroying the temple and cutting off the head of the statue. So we have a similar situation where there's violence that's taken place, and this sacred object has been displaced. It's now somewhere it doesn't belong. And it had been in town for a while, I found out later. It had actually been in my neighborhood, not far from me, in another antique shop. And those people that had it got really sick and ended up hospitalized and having to shut down their business and sell it. And that's how it ended up in this particular location, because they had purchased the stuff that they had. And in the business it was in, the business wasn't doing that well. They were about ready to have to shutter their doors at that point. And I knew it was because of the energy coming off of the head and what had happened to it. So I sent someone into the antique shop to do a reading to see if she picked up anything. I just gave her a call and said, hey, why don't you go into such and such a place and just walk around and then let me know if you get any hits. And she immediately called me up and told me about the energy she got from the Buddha head. So again, we have like an independent verification of my impressions. And so then we knew that we actually had, in this case, an actual God form or spirit form. Some types of Buddhism, they have techniques that they use where they imbue the statue with life force energy of whatever the thing the statue is for. They'll do that for what they call saints, like I guess Muktananda has a living statue of him that was done at the ashram in India and ended up in Portland, Oregon. And they use his ashes in it, and they have their own magical practices that they use in order to bring life to the statue. So he becomes a living presence in the ashram for the students of, I guess that was not Muktananda, that was Nityananda, his teacher. And Muktananda doesn't have one that I know of. But anyway, so yeah, Nityananda, there's a statue, living statue of him. There's also one of Shiva, which is quite fantastic. Those are other subjects though. So, okay. So I know that this is a possibility and this kind of stuff happens. And we talk it over, and we actually, I'm going to go get him. He's over here. We made him a house. Okay, I'm back. So, I bought a fairly generic, but I liked the style. It was similar to the head that particular statue had. He wasn't one of the jolly Buddhas or, big cheeks and stuff like that. But so I purchased him at Ross's and made it a house. When we arrived at our door, Ian dropped the bag and broke him. And I wasn't really upset about that because I figured that way, putting him back together, it makes him one of a kind. And so I don't know whether or not, yeah. So we did some designing on the bottom, looked up what was the appropriate. I'm not sure exactly if this is backwards or upside down from your point of view, but we prepared the house for the entity, the spirit. Hi, I'm showing you off. And because he needed one. And the woman that went with me, put you down over here, we went there, well, maybe I'll keep you in my lap for a second. We went there with the idea of offering this as a house for the spirit to transfer into, to at least get him out there. Before that, I tried a bunch of different things. I tried contacting every Buddhist temple in Oregon. None of them were interested or could afford the $700 or $800 they wanted for the head. And so the woman I was working with was worried that if we used ourselves, our bodies, as a conduit, that was the idea. It's like I would hold on to one part of the head and hold my hand on the statue. She would be on the other side doing the same thing, and we would be the bridge or the highway or whatever for the energy to pass through us and into the statue house that we had prepared. And she was worried that, she'd end up with some of the energy. So she used some runes, Nordic runes, on our heart center and on the hand that was going to be touching the statue so that we wouldn't collect any energy. And I was fine with that. I wasn't worried, but, everyone has a different level of experience and a different level of comfort, and there's nothing wrong with letting somebody set the tone if they have more concern than you do. So anyway, we went in there, and my daughter participated and distracted the owners because we knew that they wouldn't understand what we were proposing. And we snuck in there with the Buddha statue in a bag, and went into the back and just did it. It took all of like 10 seconds because we'd done all the preparation, and then we walked out with the spirit in the statue. Obviously, the head was still at the store, and I think it sold the very next day. So I thought that was interesting. Okay, I'm going to put you over here for now. Didn't want to stop touching you until we were done with your story. So that could be considered now a haunted object in the sense that it's housing a spirit energy. But the object it came from was definitely a haunted object because it was upset with what happened. And I've encountered some power objects in stores, other antique shops from time to time. And one of them was a shop up in Springfield called Main Street Antiques. It was one of those, big giant rooms where people have got their own little cupboards and stuff, where they sell their own things. And one of the sections had some actual genuine magical objects from different cultures. There was a special bowl from a Santeria kind of temple setting that my husband recognized. I mean, they were just they had power to them. And one of the objects was this box. The box was probably at least 2 feet high or so, and fairly wide and square. It was labeled a medicine box from Indonesia, I think, and it had this very vivid carving of a sort of demon-like face, with teeth and whatnot. That's pretty typical for the regions for protective spirits, guardian type spirits on the box. And I looked at this box and I knew that that was still in it. I mean, I could see the being that had been placed in the carving, and it was still guarding the box. That this was an item that never should have been separated from the person or the family that owned it. The only people who would be safe in handling that box would be a relative of the person who made the box. Or maybe it should have been burned at their death. I don't know enough about that particular item and the culture around it as to how it should be handled. So I told my husband, I want you to look at this, but don't touch it. And he felt it as well, and it was really strong. And that worried me, that some person who had no ability to sense things would see this item and want to buy it and put it in their house and have it like on a shelf somewhere or as a doorstop. Who knows? If they didn't understand what the object meant, they could use it for really inappropriate things, and then they would be in big trouble. We went back like only a month or so later, because my friend Shay came into town to show her these items, because I was just so astonished. Someone robbed some sacred sites. That seemed to be quite clear that this was stuff that never should have been on the market. It was still actively being used wherever it came from, and all of them were gone. I mean, the store and stuff was still there, but this booth, there was no sign of it. And I talked to the woman who was there and asked her about that booth, and she says she doesn't know what happened, but one day they came in and took everything away. And she wasn't sure whether the person who owned all that stuff had passed or what had happened. So I'm like, okay, so this is a good warning about magical objects. And I would sort of call that a haunted object in the sense that, if you interacted with it wrong, it could cause you serious harm, and it would be a really bad idea to own. And of course, I have, that encounter with the staff at the flea market. Not quite a haunted object, but definitely a living object with an intelligence in it that was very angry because the person he'd been gifted to, he was gifted this magical staff by a shaman, and apparently the shaman made a mistake, and the person decided to quit the path, and he was trying to sell the staff, and I could feel this rage coming from a block and a half away. It was at a outdoor flea market in an old drive-through open-air theater, drive-through theater, which they don't use anymore. And I went tracking down this energy, and I saw this man standing there with the staff, and I'm like, hey, are you selling your staff? And he said, yes, I am. I says, don't you know you can't do that? Can't you feel how angry the staff is at you? And he got angry with me and started swearing up a blue streak and telling me off and none of my business and who did I think I was and whatnot. So I thought, okay, I did what I could. I warned him. And anything that comes from this is on him, because it's not okay to sell a magical object that's been gifted to you, especially a staff, because that is like a representation of authority and power in the universe. And that's just not okay. So sort of a haunted object, but then not necessarily specifically haunted in, what people usually think of. So then, I have a friend who was very ill health. She was going through it. She has since passed. She was at the time starting to get worse and worse and getting to the point where she couldn't walk. um, and so they decided to buy her an electric wheelchair. And they got it from hospice. The person who was supposed to use the wheelchair had never actually gotten to use it, but was in the process of being fitted for the chair. And so she bought the chair, brought it into her house, and 3 days later she's calling me up on the phone, and she hasn't made the connection between the chair and what's going on in her house. She had lived in that house for like 17 years at that point, never had a single paranormal event take place. All of a sudden she's got something scratching at her door and banging the garage door outside, and everybody is freaking out. Understandably so, because that's sort of a startling thing to have happen. Claw marks and whatnot, and it kind of make you feel, ew, what's going on here? So I figured it was an emergency because she never asked for anything like this before, and I knew her well enough to know that, yeah, she's not making this stuff up. So I went over there, and that was a haunted object because the person who died before he could get the chair was so attached to the chair, the idea of the chair, I should say, representing the opportunity for him to have freedom to get around and so forth, and had been focused on that when he died, that he attached himself to the chair. And when the chair was purchased and brought into their house, he was one of those spirits who didn't know he was dead. He thought he'd been kidnapped, and they were taking his chair. He was very confused. He didn't know what was going on. He was attempting to escape the house, to get away, which was all the banging and the clawing and manifested as that. And so that one was a fairly easy fix for me because I had an actual human spirit in that case that I could communicate with. And so I talked him through what had happened, let him know that he had passed and that no one had actually kidnapped him, showed him where he wanted to go on the other side, got his relatives to come and meet him and take him where he needed to go. And then I grounded out any energy left over in the chair and took that energy outside and grounded it in the earth. So I cleansed the chair. So that is definitely a haunted object. There was another haunted object that I never discovered what the object was because it was at the other theater that we did, and this person was they didn't have him as a ghost until they brought whatever the object that meant something to him was purchased and brought in and was in the props closet. Because he was definitely seriously there. Again, in that case, it didn't matter if I knew what the object was because there was an actual human spirit associated with however it got in there. He was interesting, though, because he tried getting in my body like 3 times, and I kept, no, you can't come in, that's not why I'm here. He pressed in my back, between my shoulder blades and my head, and I had to, be pretty firm about my boundaries with that guy. And I didn't tell him I was coming back. That was the first meeting when I was just checking it out. That theater had all kinds of stuff going on. And when I came back, his rage was palpable. It was pretty interesting. He was really, really angry at me. And then I'm like, hey, I never said I wasn't coming back. Sorry I didn't tell you I was coming back, but I'm here now, so let's move on. And he was one of those that wanted to get a message across to his loved one, who had already passed over to the other side because he had been gone for a long time. It was clear. So I got him connected to her spirit so he could go and tell her what he needed to tell her about how much he loved her and how he was okay. And and then so he was gone, and we didn't need to know what the object was. So it's like, it's interesting that there's that whole range of possibilities in objects having either residual energy left over from the people that were around them when they were alive, or actual spirits being attached to the object for different reasons. I'm trying to think if there were other ones that were similar. There probably are, but because I've gone on a lot of different investigations and encountered a lot of different objects here and there, pictures and statues and things that have negative energy that need to be moved. There was one house we went to that was one of our last investigations before all of the pandemic hit, was local, and someone had stolen a statue off of a grave site from a local cemetery and used it as a lawn ornament. Yeah, which was a very bad idea. That was definitely not a good idea. And of course, my recommendation for that was to take it back to the cemetery. The people who had the property, they didn't own the property, they were just renting the property, and it wasn't theirs to move, so who knows what happened to it. Oh yeah, there was the car up at a case inland that we did when I was checking his place out. He restored vehicles, and there was a sort of convertible kind of vehicle in the garage, and I touched that, and I saw this horrific accident and this woman getting killed, and she was there. She was like there with the car. So, yeah, so I crossed her over. But that was interesting because, you know, it's always a surprise to me when I touch something and I get something. I can touch hundreds of things and not have anything happen. Oh yeah, there was another one I was going to tell you about, which is not quite a haunted object either, but hey, you know, I got to start somewhere, right? So there's this like big building, you know, one of those open buildings, like a you know, one of those warehouse type things, metal buildings that you can just throw up. And this guy threw this building up and had all kinds of fun junk in there. My husband was beside himself with glee. We found some really expensive audio cables that had been thrown out by our local manufacturer for 50 cents or something like that. It was like, wow. Yeah, so he was having a blast just running around looking at all the stuff that they had. And I was walking through, and I'm in an open area. I mean, there's some shelving and so forth. The shelving is like, you know, a little higher than my head maybe in some places, but there's no rafters or anything like that. And I suddenly feel the sensation of walking through like cobwebs is how it felt. Like all of a sudden there was like a wall. I was walking through a wall, and it suddenly dawned on me that I was sensing a house, that there used to be a house there. And I thought, wow, you know, I mean, I had a floor plan and everything. I knew where this house was inside this building. And so when we went to purchase our items, I asked this guy whether there used to be a house on that lot. And he says, oh, yeah, he says, and people thought I was crazy. I moved it to the backyard. It was 100 years old or more. And I thought anything that stood that long deserved to stay. And so he actually physically moved the house to a new location, but I walked through where the old house had been. So I thought that was interesting, that it had that energy that was there. I just thought, wow, that is so cool. So, yeah, thinking if anything else is popping in. There's probably going to be other stories I think about after I say I'm done. But, so I guess the lesson in all of this has to do with keeping an open mind and trying to discern the differences between an object that is just imprinted because of how it was taken, or an object that is imprinted because of the energy that happened around it. I guess someone was dying, or someone who owned it for a long period of time, and the kind of energy that they represent, that represented, either good or bad. Whether there's an actual spirit being or a human spirit attached to an object, figuring out why is important. Oh yeah, that's right, there was another one at the printing place. This woman had made this printing operation buy all of her old dice, the printing sets that they have, the letters and stuff like that. And she was very concerned that they weren't going to take care of it properly. And so she haunted the place to watch how they worked. And they knew it, they could feel her. So that would be an attachment to an object. So she basically haunted the objects, and in that sense haunted the building because they had her objects in the building. I'd almost forgotten about her. And with her, I just convinced her that she'd been watching them long enough and that they had proven themselves. And she decided it was okay, she could let it go. She was like 98, I think, when she passed, but she was a very well-known personality in the area as well. So yeah, that would sort of be a haunted object for sure. But yeah, so, you know, not jumping to conclusions and being able to differentiate between the different kinds of energy helps you to create a path of action, you know, a way to travel forwards to find out if you can do something about it, and if so, what you can do. And if you can't, you can leave the object where it's at. That would be like the guy who was the wax, stuck in the wax figure in the weird little museum down south, that I could sense. And I guess that would be sort of like a haunted object. It was like a prison for this weirdly bad energy being. I chose to leave that one completely alone because I didn't know why he was there. He wasn't angry in the usual way. It wasn't like normal anger, like no one has seen me in 1,000 years and no one knows I'm here kind of thing. Or I'm really frustrated kind of angry. It was malevolent rage. And so I left that alone. I said, above my pay grade, someone else is going to have to deal with this. Or maybe no one should, because this is where this thing belongs. And I don't know the reason why. So it's okay to pass on stuff. Just because something happens doesn't mean that it's your obligation to take care of it. It's okay to have your own boundaries and just say, hey, let me call in an expert or someone who knows more, or good luck, I don't know what the hell's going on, and I'm out of here. You know, it's like we get shamed into doing things in life in general, and so especially if we're working with subtle forces and magical realities and so forth, it's important for us to be very firm about our abilities and acknowledge our weaknesses so that we don't get ourselves into too much trouble. It's the easiest way to not be in too much trouble. So I'm going to do another video later on the similar subject, hopefully next week, and get that out. But as you know, we've been going through a bunch of stuff here, so I just wanted to get something out for the holiday and give you all something to think about, and for those in the Northern Hemisphere, potentially to encounter over the next week or so, because Samhain's coming rather quickly. So this has been Siofra's Magic Alcove, and I'm Siofra Bradigan. Blessed be.